arms towards the sun. You feel the warmth of the rays, and then you know you're alive, and you don't have to be afraid of anything.
Welcome to the Bassline. Dr. Andrew Zywiec is a veteran of the U.S. military and a veteran from the front lines of COVID here in New York City. He is one of the right docs of history who stood up to nonsensical protocols and dehumanizing medical mandates. He is also the doctor at the very forefront of the fight against child mutilation being done under the disgraceful euphemism of gender-affirming care. Here to provide us with an update and further insights, I'd like to welcome back to the Bassline a true soldier for medical freedom, Dr. Andrew Zywiec. Welcome back, brother. How are you today?
Hey, I'm doing well, Jeremiah. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. Thank you. Well, first of all, everybody, you know the drill. Would love to ask you for your support for a moment. Don't want to take too long, but sign up for a chess lesson, remote-learning-chess.com. That's my company. Check out my music at jeremiahhosea.com and check me out on Substack. I have a relatively new article I just put out called The Furious Five, and there are great comments under the article. I think it's a pretty good article, if I do say so myself, but the comments beneath the article are proof that at the very least it's thought-provoking. And all that being said, I want to jump right into our conversation here. So first of all, Dr. Z, you're residing in Florida now. Is that correct? You're undergoing the process of opening up a new facility. What's the status of that? What's being built or what has been built and what's going on with you down there in Florida, first of all?
Sure. So, I'm down in Orlando, Florida now. We started getting a clinic opened a little bit some time ago, and we're still in the works of doing all of that. I'm mostly doing telehealth right now, as that's actually what's most needed, and I'm doing some work on vaccine exemption and vaccine injury, some consulting and things of that nature. So still working on the clinic. It takes a lot of effort to get physical structures up and get everything kind of set in place. So that's kind of that's been a back burner issue because there's been quite a few other things kind of that have come up in the time being.
Right. When you say we, who's involved in that project?
So myself, I have a colleague that does cold laser therapy, and there's some other physicians that we've been working with down here in Florida, trying to get everybody on the same page, trying to get treatment protocols, trying to get things designed. So it's always a slow progress or process trying to get things like this started. We're also currently working with some labs. We finally got a spike protein assay, which an actual quantitative one. So that's been actually one of the things that we've been focused on doing in the recent months.
Excellent. Definitely keep us posted with all the updates from down there in Orlando. That sounds great. I've noticed over the years, and you mentioned vaccine injury in your statement there, I've sort of observed, if I may, your evolution on the subject a little bit. And you went from, I'd say, being sort of like moratorium on all vaccines sort of category to now, upon further research, you've become, from what I've noticed, staunchly anti-vax. Could you describe your evolution in terms of what you've learned about vaccines and your general opinion about vaccination as a practice at this point?
Sure. Yeah. So I'm for context, I'm a newer physician. I graduated in 2019 and started practicing medicine in 2020. And I started in June of 2020 in Brooklyn, New York. So I walked right into the first wave of the pandemic in one of the nation's largest metropolises. So with that being said, we don't. in medicine, we don't learn very much, if anything, really, apart from historical context about vaccinations. So I think most doctors that are walking in from an allopathic perspective haven't really taken deep consideration into vaccines. Given the fact that it's not really in the scope of medical school and in your training, and there's obviously a lot of other things that you're learning over the course of the eight or so years that it takes to get your medical doctorate. So I was never a big vaccine person. I never took flu shots, and I never took any unnecessary shots. I was in the military, as you said before, so I had to take all sorts of experimental injections and all kinds of garbage when I was there. But overall, I was never a big vaccine person. I've never been a big pharma person. I've always leaned more towards naturopathic approaches. But when I first got into medicine, obviously it was during COVID, and I was staunchly against the COVID mandates for a lot of different reasons. First and foremost, patient autonomy. Secondarily, the reasoning behind the mandate was problematic, and at a tertiary level, the research obviously wasn't done. It takes 10 to 15 years to get things through the correct trials, phase 1, 2, and 3. And we could talk about ethical implications in clinical trials as well that can be problematic. But, the rollout was extremely quick. The research after the first 6 months had, I want to say, like a 98.6, 98.8% perfect recovery rate for all individuals across the board. The only people that were getting ill in that small 1% or so was people that had chronic comorbidities and 65 and older, waning immune system. So, and I'm in pediatric medicine, so that wasn't at all our subset of patients. So it wasn't really a problem there. So initially, the COVID vaccine, I walked into my career, so vaccines were immediately on my mind, which for me is quite beneficial, given the fact that I walked into this, and then that was the very first thing that I was forced to really look into. And finding out, all of the issues with that vaccine, that kind of immediately pushed me into looking at other vaccines. So you looking at all of the additional vaccines, I guess when you stop to think about it, it's very simple from a common sense perspective. You look at where we're at right now, 72 vaccines on a childhood vaccine schedule. Like, what did we do before we had 72 vaccines to protect these innocent little children from the horrible world? So, I started looking at it from that perspective, and the initial things I think that everybody walks into is really simple stuff. Hep B. Hep B is an injection. It's contracted through injection drug use. It's contracted through sexual intercourse, things like that. Like, why are we giving a baby on day one of life, this injection? So you start looking at the common sense protocols behind it, and you see that they don't really make sense. And then you look at the fact that it's a business model, right? And there's a lot of profiteering off of it. So these are the things I think that are initial, that any person, whether they're scientifically inclined or not, can start to look at and just anticipate that it's a problem. When you go deeper into it, you look at the actual, immunology and the biochemistry behind it. It doesn't make any sense. Trying to inflame the immune system to train the immune system up for something that it may or may not see in the future, seems like something that you're doing for theoretical future benefit with practical immediate risk. And then once you start looking at the risk profiles, you start looking at, vax versus unvaxxed. I think Mawson et al. In study published by Mawson et al. In 2017 showed vaccinated versus unvaccinated. And the odds ratios for every single illness that they looked at was much higher in vaccinated patients. Allergic rhinitis was 30 times higher in children. Allergies were about 4 times, ADHD 4 times, autism 4 times, eczema 3 times, learning disabilities 5 times. So the data clearly indicates that vaccinated children have a lot more immunological problems than unvaccinated children. Then you start to look at when did vaccines really, hit the market mainstream. You go back to the 1970s and you see that, there's only maybe 4 vaccines on the schedule. Now there's 72. Over that time frame, the increase in vaccines correlate very well with the increase in chronic illness in pediatric patients. And then you look at the legal system, you look at liability shields, you look at the fact that these people can't be held accountable for any problems. So again, you start to look at all sorts of things, and it becomes very clear very quickly how much of a problem this is. Then, you move into looking at the adjuvants and the things that are in vaccines, because, most doctors, as I said, they don't study vaccines. They don't even know what's in them, let alone how they work. So you start looking at you start looking and seeing what's in the vaccines. There's things like polysorbate. There's things like aluminum. And I say those 2 in particular because I think they're particularly important. Polysorbates increase permeability of the blood-brain barrier by disrupting tight junctions, promoting endocytosis into the brain. Sometimes they're even studied for drug delivery with polysorbates. And when you add in aluminum, you can all of a sudden realize, well, that's a good way for aluminum to wind up in the brain. A toxic dose of aluminum for any human being is around 70 to 100 micrograms per liter. 50 micrograms is toxic. 100 micrograms is actually severely damaging to the neurological system. Now, you look at the shots that have polysorbate, which allows permeability of the blood-brain barrier, and then aluminum. DTaP has 625 micrograms of aluminum. Haemophilus has 225. Hepatitis has 225. HPV has 500. Meningitis B has 525, I think. So you start to look at all of these patterns, and then you see children with autism have aluminum deposition in the brain. A paper published in I want to say somewhere in 20. Actually, I'm not going to say because I don't remember what year, but the Journal of Trace Elements in Medicine and Biology, showed that there's aluminum deposition in the microglia of the brain of patients with Alzheimer's disease at really high rates. The normal range is around like 1 microgram per gram of brain dry weight. This showed, 3 to 4 micrograms in different areas, depending on occipital, frontal, temporal, depending on where they measured. And the microglia are the immune system cells of the brain, the macrophages that chew up everything and promote the immune response. They're the brain's main immune cell. So, long story short, no matter where you look, whether it be common sense, whether it be biochemistry, whether it be the immune system function, whether it be studies showing vaxxed versus unvaxxed, whether you're looking at things that are in vaccine excipients or things of that nature, everything becomes problematic. And I think further, if you theorize it further, and you start to have to ask, well, how are vaccines causing other things like allergies and things like that? You realize that anytime you inject a protein that can get into the blood supply, you're going to induce an immune response. Like the flu vaccine has egg proteins in it. Most vaccines have gelatin, animal proteins. Most of them have lactose proteins. Hep B has yeast. And you start to see, well, we've got a lot of, allergies to gluten and to breads and to milk and to eggs and to all sorts of other things. And once again, when these proteins wind up in the blood supply, rather than going through the GI tract where they get broken down into amino acids and then absorbed as small unit amino acids. Instead, these whole proteins are getting into the blood supply and promoting an immune response for later in life, and they can cause significant allergy. So again, there's so much. There's so much to discuss, and once again, no matter what direction you choose to go in, I think it's clear, and it's painfully clear, and you don't have to even dig very deep to get there.
Right. Well, wow, that was really thorough. So thank you for that. That's like a clip. Everyone should just snip everything that Dr. Z just said and just propagate that everywhere, because you made so many great points and you made them so succinctly. But let's talk specifically about the COVID injections that were falsely marketed as vaccines. I'm so amazed, Dr. Z, that to this day, I mean, just yesterday, watching commercial television, which I generally actually try not to do unless I'm watching sports, which I am a sports fan. But yesterday, the television was on, and I'm noticing they're still just advertising COVID vaccines, quote unquote, as though this hasn't been an abject failure before the global public. I mean, from claiming that they would stop transmission and infection, which proved quickly to be not true at all. And then they said, oh, wait a second, this is actually negative efficacy, according to the Cleveland Clinic study, and actually even from just some really basic data that was gathered from Walgreens, of all places. They were, I guess, keeping a basic record of, well, how many shots have you received at these, what's basically like equivalent to a pop-up injection site. You're not in a proper medical facility, you're at a commercial drugstore, and they were asking, well, how many shots have you received? And they noticed, oh, the more shots you've received, the more likely it is that you catch COVID. But then, of course, we have this unbelievable side effects profile. Dr. Ryan Coles called it the Swiss Army knife of injury and death, which is confirmed by the 1,291 side effects that were listed in the Pfizer documents that they wanted to keep hidden for 75 years. I don't know if there's an official side effects count from Moderna and J&J. I'd love to hear that. You always hear, I feel like, disproportionately about Pfizer, when it seems like all three of the shots that were available here seemed roughly equally injurious. Like if you see these compilations of the vaccine injured, they'll mention Pfizer, Moderna, J&J, Moderna, Pfizer, J&J, Moderna. It was just a round robin, and it just seemed like all three shots had contributed to injuring quite a large number of people. But with the VAERS data that was ignored, even though it indicated 5-alarm fire, with all of the peer-reviewed studies that have come out, with documentaries that have come out of people one after the other saying, I took this shot, it ruined my life, with programs such as this that have documented quite extensively at this point the firsthand accounts of the vaccine injured. What would you say, Dr. Z, to someone who just has been completely ignorant? Actually, it's funny. Someone took offense to my usage of the term ignorant in my last article, but I found that strange because I went out of my way to say, not to insult you and say that you are stupid, but rather to really focus on the root of the word ignorant, which is to ignore. So with all of this evidence, these different categories of evidence that have been ignored in terms of the harms that these shots have inflicted, what would be your speech? Take as long as you need, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. What would you explain to someone who's simply unaware that these shots have certainly injured people and were not successful as a medical intervention? What would you say to someone who's just not aware of these things at this point?
I mean, there's so much to talk about and to unpack, and for the person that's not paying any attention, where to start is you're gonna have to meet people where they're at. So I think it really depends individually, but the shots are an obvious failure. There has been, maybe I shouldn't say that. They weren't a failure. They were a success. I think for the reasons that they were intended, I think that they were highly successful, right, in creating a lot of illness and increasing morbidity and mortality. Now, everything has been marked and labeled as some conspiratorial, issue. Well, when you have, one person's anecdote or two persons anecdote, okay, you might not want to, take that to the bank. But when you have, thousands, at this point, tens of thousands of physicians standing up and screaming bloody murder about something, I mean, it would make sense and behoove you to look at that. One thing, for the average person that still thinks that these shots are good, one of the first things I really would say is, why do you think that tens of thousands of physicians are screaming bloody murder, and to no benefit? By the way, if you push the shot, you get paid. If you push the shots, you get paid. If you push the shots, the system loves you, the public loves you, everybody's happy with you. If you oppose these shots, you're not getting anything in return. No, doctors are losing their licenses. Doctors are getting thrown in jail. Doctors are getting targeted and harassed and threatened by the medical boards, threatened by the government. So you have to ask yourself, why are tens of thousands of doctors willing to sacrifice their entire careers, their lives, their peace, everything that they have in order to speak out against this? The first place to look would be VAERS. That I think there's probably 1.8 million hits in VAERS right now. There are conservative numbers that say, perhaps 1 million people have died from vaccines. There are less conservative numbers that say 20 to 30 million patients have died from vaccines. So you can look at the data about how many people are actually vaccine injured. And in a strange way, people, and this is just in the last 4 years, people think that vaccine injury is not a thing. And they think that vaccine injury was made up just for COVID, which is demonstrably false on every single level. Every vaccine, even if you think that vaccines are great, all vaccines come with a risk profile. There's a national vaccine injury compensation fund in the United States. There's plenty of research in the United States on adverse effects of vaccines. Every single vaccine has one. People have died from every single vaccine. This isn't something new. It's just that it exploded with COVID. So again, there's been so many things that were propagandized. Obviously, masking was pure propaganda. Eliminating transmission, especially when a lot of scientists and doctors came out and said, this completely stops transmission. You will not get sick if you take that's. You can't make absolute statements about anything that guaranteed preventative measures. That those kind of statements are never made in medicine and should never be made in medicine generally. But apart from that, you can if they're scientific, you can start to look into the science of it. You can look into the development of lipid nanoparticles, and you can see all the problems that lipid nanoparticles can cause in the body. And one of the first ones is a extreme allergic or an extreme anaphylactic reaction to those. You can look at the fact that the mRNA has synthetic parts like the pseudouridine. You can look at the fact that the lipid nanoparticle makes sure to transfect all cells, so it's not targeted. Most therapeutics are highly, highly targeted. This one's not targeted at all. It can get into every single cell, any and all. You can look at the history of the research on the spike protein and look at all of the problems that the spike protein causes. And I say these things to illustrate that this was all known prior to them putting it into you. They knew about all of these side effects. They knew about all of these problems. And I think that's in the end, that'll be their way out. They said that this was, perfect and this couldn't harm you. And I think, they'll shift, as they always do, the argument that once they have no more room to deny, they'll probably just move into the area of, well, it was for the greater good. Would you rather be dead? Because you see people talk about this already. People will say, well, imagine if I hadn't gotten the vaccine. Mm-hmm. How much worse off would I have been? Not realizing that it was more likely than not the vaccine that actually harmed them. Yeah. So, it's always shifting focus. So I don't actually, I've been fighting this for a long time and speaking to the public and being very vocal. I don't really try to convince anybody anymore. I used to, and for years I did, and it was a one-by-one process, and it took a lot of time and patience. But at this point in time, I have kind of shifted away from trying to wake other people up, and I have just focused on trying to help people that are actually injured.
Understandable. Yeah, I mean, there's only so many hours in the day. You know, you have to kind of pick your battles at a certain point. Couple quick announcements here. First of all, I've encouraged this audience. I know a lot of you guys are old school and don't even have email, or, you know, don't have apps on your phone, or, you know, I know there's a lot of old school heads, which I appreciate in this audience, but I will encourage you once again to start a Twitter account, if for no other reason than to have a medical freedom focused account where you can follow people like Dr. Z. You can follow me and retweet and repost the links to the Bassline archives. There's so many great folks on Twitter putting out good information every day, and also Twitter Spaces, which I want to announce specifically this Sunday at 9 p.m. EST, that's Eastern Standard Time. There's going to be a medical freedom strategy session with myself and Julie Threet, who is a former guest on this program, as well as Ronald Owens Jr., a recent guest on this program. And again, the focus is medical freedom strategy session, which I hope perhaps you could join us for, Dr. Z. I had the pleasure of hosting a Twitter space with Dr. Z recently, and a lot of great folks tuned in. It was a really productive discussion, I would say. And yeah, folks are meeting on a regular basis, so it's a great way to connect with the community. And as a matter of fact, when we did our first interview, Dr. Z, we were doing it right after your account had just been suspended again. So I don't know how many times that's happened, but he lost about 15,000 followers at the time. And amazingly, I don't know what you're up to now, but last time I checked, he had built his way back up to over 25,000 followers. So people know about Dr. Z. My account is rising slowly and humbly every day. I get a couple new followers, but just very slowly, actually, considering the level of folks that we've had on the show, including Dr. Andrew Zywiec, Dr. Mary Talley Bowden, Dr. Merrill Nass, Dr. Kat Lindley, Steve Kirsch. I hate to even mention names because I'm necessarily leaving out all kinds of other great folks. But you guys know, incredible guests here on a weekly basis. And my Twitter account, which was practically inactive before all this medical freedom stuff started, I don't even think I had 300 followers. Now I have 3,600 followers, but it should be much, 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 much more, so that every time I announce an interview or a new article, it's just reaching a wider range of people. But that being said, how does the saying go? A rising tide raises all ships, or something like that. Dr. Z, if he has 25,000 followers, that's pretty darn good, I would say. But you know what? He needs 1 million followers, and not for reasons of aggrandizing him or me or anybody, but because what he's talking about is so important in terms of not only what we just discussed, but now what we're about to get into, which is the topic of gender-affirming care, which is, as he has stated clearly and repeatedly, it's the surgical mutilation and chemical castration of children. Children are being told that if they're confused about something in their life, that if they're, feel a little different, that perhaps they're the other sex and they should have surgery so they can change sexes, which is, of course, something that mutilates your body, prevents you from being able to reproduce, prevents you from being able to have an orgasm, is extremely painful, extremely dangerous, which I doubt full disclosure is being practiced in that respect, because I think a lot of people are unaware of the full extent of the pain and suffering that they're signing on to. Continued hormone treatments, which I'm sure are not good for the body in general. And this has become something that they've tried to make perfectly mainstream. I was amazed at the current administration, the exiting administration, put the transgendered flag right over the White House with, American flags on the side, and the newly edited, it was the rainbow flag in the first place, but now they added the transgender triangle to try to lump it all in and put it all in under the umbrella of LGBTQ+. Now, I've said it before, let me make it perfectly clear. I don't believe in discriminating against anyone. There are gay people in the world. There are people with gender dysphoria. I don't believe in mistreating anybody or ostracizing people. However, when we get into the realm of harming children, when we get into the realm of pushing this and making this as available as an option to young people, that's where I have a problem. As a father of 2 young children, I have to start speaking up. And, Dr. Zywiec is at the forefront of this issue. He is, to my knowledge, the first, if not the only doctor to take these issues before the Supreme Court. So all that being said, Dr. Zywiec, please just give us a little bit of the background that you've already covered in the previous episode, but just remind us your background in regard to this issue of fighting against the mutilation of children, and just give us an overview of where we stand today in terms of legally, medically, all that you can share with us about this really serious issue that, if you don't have young kids, you might not consider this in the same way. If you haven't been keeping an eye on the legislation that's being pushed, you might not realize just how aggressive this is to really try to offer to this generation and future generations of children, hey, that's an option. If you are confused in your life, maybe you need to remove your genitals or remove body parts, basically non-medical amputations for psychological reasons, basically. So give us an overview of what's happening with this just horrific practice that seems to be growing in America in terms of the number of clinics that are doing this and the legislation that's supporting this. Give us an overview, please.
Sure. So I guess first let's kind of break down gender dysphoria. So gender dysphoria was previously known by a different name, gender identity disorder, and it was more colloquially known as just transsexualism, which is different than transvestism. So not to conflate those two. So they changed the name of gender identity disorder to gender dysphoria in the newer version, the DSM-5 from the DSM-4. The DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Illness. Now, gender dysphoria is considered by definition to be an incongruence between one's biological sex and one's psychological sense of self as it pertains to their sex. So essentially, a male thinking that he's a female, or feeling like a female, or a female feeling like she's a male, and so forth.
Wait, hold on 1 second, Dr. Zywiec. Sorry to interrupt you, but just to quickly announce, just to manage time a little bit, if you'd like to talk to Dr. Zywiec, if you have a question, feel free to call 888-874-4888. I just want to put that out there so folks have a chance to call before we're just right up at the end of the program. But sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead about gender dysphoria, Dr. Zywiec. Sorry.
Yeah, no problem. Where was I? So that incongruence, that incompatibility has to be significant enough that it causes significant distress in the patient's life, insofar as relationships, work, things of that nature. And it has to persist for 6 months or longer. Now, this is similar to a gender, it could be similar to a body dysmorphia. It could be considered a delusion. A delusion is a fixed false belief that is held for greater than 30 days with evidence to the contrary, and that is not a cultural or religious belief. This kind of thing, this kind of diagnosis generally only affected 0.01% of the population. Statistically, most likely to affect young girls, prepubescent. Most normally, puberty, handled everything. Mostly, it's just kids being confused about kids. I think it's more the parents and the adults that are more concerned about these things in children of that age that are that young. And somewhere along the lines, this really exploded, and it really started. I mean, this dates back to as early as the 1940s and the 1950s. Some of this stuff was going on in Germany. Transgenderism was a thought back then. A guy by the name of John Money did some experiments later on. I want to say in the 50s or 60s. So I mean, it's been around for a long time, and but it's always been kind of fringe. It's been kind of on the outskirts. It's a very rare thing, not so much mainstream. So nobody, I don't think. Well, I won't say nobody. The vast majority of people were not paying a great amount of attention to this. In med school, I think we spent 5 seconds, just saying what the definition was, and then moving on. Now it's increased from 0.01% to 25% in some subcategories of our youth. So I mean, it is just skyrocketed. Thousands upon thousands of percentage increases. And the idea behind it is highly pervasive, right? It's convincing a child that they're born in the wrong body, essentially, and convincing that child that they must try to change something immutable about their self, such as your actual biological sex. And essentially at the core, it's teaching somebody to hate themselves. And, the first step, as young as 9 years old, they're placing these children on Lupron, which is a gonadotropin hormone agonist, which is the same drug that they use to chemically castrate sex offenders. Now, this drug has all sorts of side effect profiles. It can disrupt musculoskeletal development. It can cause osteoporosis. It can cause infertility. It can cause neurohormonal disruption. It can cause developmental issues, emotional disturbance. I mean, there's such a massive range of physiological and psychological issues that these medications can cause. Then on top of that, after this, the idea, because remember, this is like a pipeline. Once you start, you just keep moving forward. So the next thing is to put the patient on a cross-sex hormone, the hormones of the opposite gender, to unnaturally develop the child's secondary sexual characteristics into the opposing gender. And I remember, these are small children. Children are not sexual beings, right? These are small children still. And these, obviously, cross-sex hormones come with a whole slew of their own side effects. The simplest way to look at it is, go look at some guy who takes, 10 times the amount of testosterone that he's supposed to take. Look what happens to him. Increased risks of cancer, increased risks of rage, heart attacks, hypertension, kidney failure, liver failure. And now imagine putting that amount of testosterone or something into the opposite gender, somebody whose body isn't even naturally supposed to see something like that. So it comes with its own list of magnificently disturbing problems. And then finally, surgical cosmetics, which is the castration and mutilation of their genitals. And, in the United States, I think, there were, in 2022, the estimate was that 1,500 to 2,000 children underwent mastectomy. So girls got their breasts removed because they thought they were boys. And they were sold this lie. Just this year, a 17-year-old male who goes by the name of Emily Tressa had his genitals removed and had a reassignment to female surgery in New York City at Mount Sinai, which is actually the affiliate of the hospital where I worked at and where I actually filed my lawsuits by a doctor named Dr. Ting. So these things are happening, and I always encourage people. They don't like to hear the nitty gritty of these things, but I encourage people to really think about this. They're hauling in little kids and hacking off their breasts with a scalpel. They're hauling in boys and cutting off their testicles, cutting off their penis, hollowing out a hole and putting in the colon tissue, the tissue from the rectum and the colon, to create a fake vagina. This is a child. This isn't some deranged adult who unfortunately has the right to do what they want. I disagree with this for adults too, and I think that it should be banned across the board. But we're not talking about an adult making adult decisions. We're talking about adults making children's decisions, and then the children are going to be left suffering for this. And the surgical procedures are obviously experimental. I think I should probably say that, but it shouldn't need to be said. It's obviously experimental, that they're cutting off genitals and trying to make false vaginas and, trying to make false penises and things of that nature, which obviously are non-functional, which obviously will never heal. Creating new urethras and things like that. If you look into all of the adverse effects afterwards and the risks of the surgery, they are profound. This stuff is happening by and large. There are 26 states that have some restrictions on gender-affirming care in children, and there are 24 states that do not have restrictions. And obviously, this is being pushed heavily by the media. It's incredibly widespread at this point. It's a social contagion. We have seen things like this before. The transorbital lobotomy won the Nobel Prize, I believe, and I can't remember if it was 49 or 59. Don't quote me. But the transorbital lobotomy won the Nobel Prize, where they scrambled people's prefrontal cortex because it made them more docile and childlike. That won a Nobel Prize. It was considered scientific consensus. We know that it was butchery. They used to do ovarian ovaryectomy, essentially. They used to remove women's ovaries because they thought that it was causing them to be crazy. I mean, these kind of social contagions happen. Anorexia in the 1990s, was a social contagion. These things happen, and the medical system hops on them. And but this is different. I consistently put it out there that this is absolutely different. This is worse than Joseph Mengele in Nazi Germany. This is Jeffrey Dahmer puts on a white coat and gets praised by the masses. And we have thousands of doctors, thousands, if not tens of thousands in the United States that are pushing this, fiercely. And I will guarantee 100% that this is the absolute worst atrocity that has ever been perpetrated by the medical system. And that's saying a lot because there's been a lot of bad stuff. But this is the absolute worst thing that we have ever seen. And everybody that's included in this, that has been pushing it, everybody's name that's on a chart, every doctor, every nurse, I don't believe that the legal system is going to be kind to them, and I certainly, with 100% certainty, history will not be kind.
Yeah, I don't think so at all. And, wow. I mean, first of all, just props to you, Dr. Zywiec, for being at the forefront of this issue and being so brave. It's not a pleasant thing to think about at all, but when you stop to think about, well, what the heck is going on here, it really, it's just not right, I mean, you would think that a doctor would be just very reluctant to cut somebody in general. You'd think that, we reserve surgery for really trying to help somebody heal, to help somebody, in under emergency circumstances, but just hacking off people's body parts. I mean, how these people live with themselves is just completely beyond me. It's so atrocious what's going on. And, and furthermore, I think, if you're telling a young person, if you're telling a young man, hey, you can become a woman, I think that's really misleading. I think it's misleading if you tell a young girl you can become a man. Well, first of all, I don't think you can be a woman if you didn't experience girlhood. And I don't think you could be a man if you didn't grow past boyhood. And, just to say, well, I've decided I'm a woman, which I've seen people do amazingly. Someone, 50 years old declare, well, I'm a woman today, but you didn't go through girlhood. So how can you just declare that? It's interesting that, we're so, we'd generally be intolerant. Like, what was the example? Rachel Dolezal, I think was her name, who, claimed she was a black woman and all this stuff. She was getting tans and had her hair braided, and she said she grew up within the black experience and everything. It turned out to be a total fraud. It was really frowned upon, but then it's considered, acceptable to simply decide that you have changed sexes. But the truth of the matter is, look, I'll say as a heterosexual man who's married with 2 kids, if you are a heterosexual man, you are not looking for a man who has decided he's a woman as a partner. You're looking for a woman. And I would venture to say for a heterosexual woman, you're not looking for a woman who claims they're a man. You're looking for a man if you're heterosexual. But the idea that you can simply, hack off body parts and then just function as the opposite sex, I think it's misleading, to say the least.
Well, I don't know. The fact that we're even having these conversations as adults, let alone in the medical field, is pretty disturbing in the first place. Obviously, every single human being on the planet knows what a boy and girl is. Every single person knows what the truth is. The fact that we've kind of arrived at a place where people are just absolutely willing to deny truths, to the point where little children are being butchered, all for the purpose of virtue signaling and claiming to be an empathic human being. What we're really seeing is people perpetrating evil under the guise of good. And again, I think that it is really strange that we're at this place, but there is a lot of underlying additional issues. It's not just that it's a social contagion. A lot of these things are very well engineered. Historically, they have erased genders before, and we've had battles similar like this in history with things like Mao's communist China and things like that. At the end of the day, it really is dissolution of the nuclear family unit, and that's across the board in our country. I often talk about how they separate people. They separate people through, conservative or Republican, through rich or poor, black or white. There's all these dichotomous ways that social division is engineered in society, and that allows the powers that be to maintain a tight grip of control. Which has been lurching forward quite quickly, which is why I think that people are actually waking up, because it's moving much more rapidly than it's moved over the past several decades. But this one's interestingly different because it's so much more to the core. They're separating man and woman, and they're blurring the lines between them. So this one seems to be more pervasive and more problematic. And again, it's actually causing magnificent harm in our children. So I think that people, whether you have kids, whether you don't have kids, anything of that nature, everybody should be up in arms. If we can't stand up and protect our children, then we deserve everything that's coming down the pipeline, because a society that cannot protect its children and take care of its children doesn't deserve to exist. So, yeah,
I tend to agree with that. Actually, I firmly agree with that. We still have a few minutes. If anyone wants to jump on the line with Dr. Z, I'm surprised we haven't gotten calls today. Maybe everybody's still recovering from overeating yesterday. But the number here is 888-874-4888, 888-874-4888. We probably have time for one quick call. If you want to jump on the line, we'd love to hear from you. But tell us, Dr. Z, where do people get involved in terms of fighting against this abomination of gender-affirming care? What action can people take to involve themselves in saying, hey, I don't approve of this. You should not be giving puberty blockers, and you should not be performing these mutilating surgeries on children. How do people get involved in this critical issue that's being, not addressed properly?
Well, first and foremost, I would say reach out to me. Go on X and reach out to me at Andrew Zywiec, MD. So that's one of the.
Oh yeah.
First
By the way,
things.
the spelling of that name is rather interesting. It's Zywiec. So it's pronounced Zywiec, but Zywiec. So please look up Andrew Zywiec to follow Dr. Z on Twitter. But yes, go ahead, Doctor.
I think that another thing that people should be doing is being vocal and speaking out. They're quite honestly, the reason that this issue isn't gaining as much traction as it should is because people aren't talking about it. So even just having the discussion, talking about this issue, and making sure that people are aware of what is actually happening. When I started talking about this years ago, the initial response was wild. Because I had a lawsuit against it and things like that. I was highly censored and everything. But when I started talking about it, I had thousands of people shutting down my accounts, shutting down everything I said, saying this isn't happening, this isn't real, you're a liar, despite the fact that there are thousands of cases, there's tons of medical literature, there's publications. There's just it was really interesting about how many people were just totally in the dark and denying.
Yeah.
Which I understand the initial pushback on denying, because it's disturbing. So you want to think it's not true.
Yeah.
But once you're faced with evidence to the contrary, and a lot of it, then all of a sudden the same people that said it wasn't happening just shifted into, well, why do you care? And then, as soon as you make an actual reasonable reason for caring, it's, well, you're not a doctor. Well, unfortunately for them, I am a doctor. And so what I'm trying to say is the goalposts consistently get shifted. And the idea behind it is people need to talk about this. People need to know what's happening. And quite honestly, people say, don't judge, blah, blah. No, we absolutely are judging right now. Children are being pharmacologically castrated, surgically mutilated, and psychologically tortured at the hands of doctors because of this deranged movement. I am absolutely in judgment of every single human being that perpetrates this. 15 years ago, 20 years ago, even 10 years ago, these people would have been called exactly what they are: pedophiles, child butchers, and freaks. And I'm sorry that if people think that sounds disrespectful, but the point is, I don't care. Respect went right out the window once children started getting harmed.
Yeah.
People are free to go and live their lives. I mean, who am I to tell somebody how to live their life? But that's not what we're talking about here. We're talking about children being literally carved into pieces and having body parts hacked off, and not just any body part, their reproductive organs, so that they can never have a family, they can never have children. This is, so respect is out the door. People can kind of lose me with that.
Yeah, I agree.
But anyway, so, people need to start talking about it. I would encourage, if anybody has children, you need to be speaking to your school board. You need to be making sure this isn't being pushed in your public schools. If you take your children to the doctor, you need to know exactly where your pediatrician is, because they don't have to tell you. In a lot of places, pediatric doctors do not have to discuss these things with you, just like educators don't have to discuss these things with you. And for the people that think it won't happen to them, or it needs to be on their doorstep to have a problem, there is just a big case. Jeff Younger, just lost his kids. They took his kids away, and the mother is going to castrate his children. Right. This stuff is happening to people all across the country, and the government is pushing it. And parents are losing rights, and it is not easy to get your rights back.
Yeah, it's so serious, and part of what makes it additionally serious is the lack of awareness about just the situations like what you just described. A father who is being prevented from preventing this from happening to his son. I mean, these are crimes against humanity by far. And yeah, everyone, please support Dr. Zywiec in these efforts, because imagine he's been kind of a lone voice in the wilderness around this subject to a large extent. And imagine, you're trying to raise this fundamental concern about what is happening to young people here, and you get attacked instead, and you're being character assassinated, et cetera, for sticking up for something that should be so resoundingly clear in terms of an unacceptable practice that's being inflicted on children. Yeah, we had a caller named Tom who dropped. So sorry, Tom. Not sure what happened there. We were looking forward to hearing from you, but hopefully next time. We're out of time here, everyone. Thank you, Dr. Zywiec. Keep up the great work. Looking forward to talking with you soon on a Twitter space. And good luck with everything you're doing down there in Florida. Everybody, have a great weekend and stay strong. Peace and love.
You don't have to be afraid of anything.